Human intelligence is measured by something that we call IQ, the intelligence quotient. And the way it's measured is by measuring two of the participants' primary capabilities. The first is basic problem solving. And the second, very closely related to problem solving, is pattern recognition. And this is because your intelligence is primarily fueled by your ability to recognize patterns and anticipate what comes next. What is the next logical result? And sometimes we have a situation where people who think that they are intelligent go off on something that ignores the general pattern of things and behavior. And they go out into the weeds because of an exception to the rule, or things aren't always this way, so on and so forth. And they make extremely unintelligent conclusions. Because if you've thought beyond the pattern, or the general pattern, one might say, you've thought too far. The article we're going to be going over is such an example of this phenomenon. But before we get into that, I'd like to invite you to take a look at my Subscribe Star, and you can either subscribe or you can do a one-time donation. If you like the content that I produce or the things that I have to say, just give it a look and let me know what you think, and I hope you enjoy the video. And on to the article at hand. And here is the dumb fuckery afoot. This is at the abc.net. I believe it's in Australia. This is called the Philosopher's Zone. And in philosophy, they tend to do this exact thing, where they take a situation, they take an idea, and they ignore all of the major patterns of human behavior around the phenomenon to try to come to a more pleasant, idealistic conclusion. And the title of this dear dumbfuckery tells us pretty much all we need to know. Is having a loving family an unfair advantage? Yes, they're really asking this question. I don't know if you would call having a loving family an advantage. One would think that if we're going to have families, that, that shouldn't be an advantage, it should be the norm. But let's go into the article to see what their reasoning here is. It begins. So many disputes in our liberal democratic society hinge on the tension between inequality and fairness. No. Well, right off the bat, this is a false premise. Our disputes in liberal democratic society do not hinge on inequality and fairness. They hinge on justice and whether or not the system in place is in fact just or unjust. That is the primary question. Inequality in all societies is a given. You should expect inequality in every paradigm, every single one, because people make choices. That I shouldn't have to explain this. Not all things, even though we have equal rights, that doesn't mean we'll make all the same choices. And because we make different choices, we have different results. This is the natural cause of inequality. Very simple. Again, you ignore the basic pattern, you make a stupid conclusion or a stupid observation. The power of the family to tilt equality hasn't gone unnoticed, and academics and public commentators have been blowing the whistle for some time. Now, philosophers Adam Swift, and Harry Brighouse have felt compelled to conduct a cool reassessment. Swift, in particular, has been conflicted for some time over the curious situation that arises when a parent wants to do the best for her child, but in the process makes the playing field for others even more lopsided. That's the fucking point. The point of doing the best for your child is to give them an edge over the other children. That one might say, that might be the primary motivator for doing something that is the best for your child, is because it does put them above the rest of their classmates, above their peers. That's what doing the best for your child is. But because we don't observe basic patterns of human behavior, we missed the mark. He says, I got interested in this question because I was interested in equality of opportunity, he says. I had done some work on social mobility, and the evidence is overwhelmingly that the reason why children born to different families have very different chances in life is because of what happens in those families. Duh. No shit. Yes, the way in which a parent chooses to raise their child has an effect on how the child performs in life. If parents A decide to tell their child that they are expected to get good grades, chances are the child will bring in good grades or else, as opposed to parents B who don't care, don't demand performance. Their child will not feel compelled to perform, to put forth the effort, to feel the satisfaction of getting a satisfactory grade or an exemplary grade. And so they will neither feel motivated to perform, they will not feel motivated to learn, and they won't be as successful. This is common sense. This is the general pattern of things. So, again, this is basic shit. Once he got thinking, Swift could see that the issue stretches well beyond the fact that some families can afford private schooling, nannies, tutors, and houses in good suburbs. Functional family interactions, from going to the cricket to reading bedtime stories. This is an Aussie article, so going to the cricket means like going to the ball game or something of that nature. Form a largely unseen but palpable fault line between families. Again, duh. The consequence is a gap in social mobility and equality that can last for generations. So what to do? You do nothing. You let nature take its course. You applaud the parents who worked their asses off to produce children that are functional and contributory to society. That's what you do. But according to Swift, from a purely instrumental position, the answer is straightforward. I can't wait for this. One way philosophers might think about solving the social justice problem would be by simply abolishing the family. Of course it is. Of course you would think that. Of course, that's the first place your mind would go. If the family is the source of unfairness in society, then it looks plausible to think that if we abolish the family, there might be a more level playing field. I love it when social justice warriors unironically advocate for Hitler Youth. It's not the first time a philosopher has thought about such a drastic solution. Apparently, Plato had also reasoned that the care of children should be undertaken by the state. Plato pulled few punches in the Republic when he called for the abolition of the family and for the children of the elite to be given over to the state. Aristotle didn't agree, citing the since oft used argument that the neglect of things held in common. Swift echoes the Aristotelian line, The breakup of the family is plausible, maybe, he thinks, but even to the most hard-hearted, there's something off-key about it. And why would something be off-key about it? But let's just, humor this for just a moment. Nearly everyone who has thought about this would conclude that it is a really bad idea to be raised by state institutions unless something has gone wrong, he says. Intuitively, it doesn't feel right, but for a philosopher, solutions require more than an initial reaction. Okay, let me explain that initial reaction. Let me explain that little primal itch at the back of your skull. You have lived a life. Maybe with adequate parents, maybe with inadequate parents. But you've also had a life with other people. And they have had parents. Your friends have had parents. Shit, your parents have had parents. And you have seen the result of good parenting versus bad parenting. You've seen the result of present parents versus non-present parents. You have seen those who have gone through foster care. You've seen those who have had wholesome, well-connected, not necessarily well-to-do, but loving and close-knit family ties. You instinctively know from your own experiences in the subconscious of your numbed-out mind, I'm going to assume, that this is a shit proposition. And it has nothing, it honest to God, has nothing to do with pathos. It is your mind subconsciously reasoning all this, filtering and reasoning all this shit out in ways you just haven't acknowledged yet. However, Swift and his colleague Brighouse set out to work on a respectable analytical defense of the family. I don't need you to defend the family, for fuck's sake. Asking themselves the deceptively simple question, why are families a good thing exactly? Yes, they are seriously asking in this article, why are families a good thing exactly? Again, if you ignore the basic patterns of life and you're not using your intelligence properly, you tend to think too far and you ask stupid shit like this. Not surprisingly, it begins with kids and ends with parents. Oh my God. It's the children's interest in family life that is the most important. From all we now know, it is in the child's interest to be parented and to be parented well. Meanwhile, from the adult point of view, it looks as if there is something very valuable in being a parent. He concedes parenting might not be for everyone. Okay, that's something about that line. He concedes parenting might not be for everyone. If we're going to have a question about whether or not it is unfair for children to have an unfair advantage by living in a happy and stable family, the child is a priori. It is assumed that there is a child to be parented. If parenting is not for everyone, fine. But if a child is already here, then parenting is going to be necessary. So it might be in our best interest to encourage society to parent well, to parent exceptionally. The fact that it might not be for everyone is fucking irrelevant at this point. He concedes parenting might not be for everyone, and for some it can go badly wrong. But in general, it is an irreplaceable relationship because the child is already here. That's why it's irreplaceable. Parenting a child makes for what we call a distinctive and special contribution to the flourishing and well-being of adults. Thank you, Captain Obvious. It seems that from both the parents' and adults' point of view, there is something to be said about living in a family way. This doesn't exactly parry the criticism that families exacerbate social inequality. Families exacerbate social inequality. Because families are made up of individuals who handle things differently, and because they handle things differently, they're going to be a diverse range of outcomes that are not going to be equal. Because that's how reality works. For this, Swift and Brighouse needed to sort out those activities that contribute to unnecessary inequality from those that don't. This is going to be a doozy. What we realized we needed was a way of thinking about what it was we wanted to allow parents to do for their children, and what it was we didn't need to allow parents to do for their children. What the fuck? That's not authoritarian at all. I mean, they're seriously sitting down and asking themselves, what activities are too much advantage for a child? If allowing those activities would create unfairness for other people's children. The test they devised was based on what they term familial relationship goods. Ah, yes. If you put this in a tilt that says that these actions, these activities are quote-unquote familial relationship goods, and the goods should be distributed equally in theory, in the abstract sense, those unique and identifiable things that arise within the family unit and contribute to the flourishing of family members. So we want to distribute the familial relationship goods, is the general gist here that I'm getting here. For Swift, there's one particular choice that fails the test. Now, we're not told how they measure or weigh these quote-unquote familial relationship goods, how they determine what is a good versus what is not a good. But all we do know, according to this article, is that private schooling cannot be justified. It is just not the case that in order for a family to realize these intimate, loving, authoritative, affectionate, love-based relationships, you need to be able to send your child to an elite private school. Oh, I'm sorry, but why the fuck not? Is it not an act of love for a parent to recognize that their child is exceptional? And because their child is exceptional and their child deserves to be challenged to their level of competence, that they should be permitted access to an environment that challenges them. Is that not an act of love? Is it not something that the parent does for the child? Is it not something that the child could understand that is being done for their good and for their interest and for their creativity and for their advancement? Where do these fuckers get off? In contrast, reading stories at bedtime, argues Swift, gives rise to acceptable familial relationship goods, even though this also bestows advantage. This is the funny part. This is the part where they are very bad Marxists and are not being consistent with their ideology. The evidence shows that the difference between those who get bedtime stories and those that don't, and those who don't, the difference in their life chances is bigger than the difference between those who get elite private schooling and those that don't. So, in essence, you get a bigger advantage out of your family life as a child having bedtime stories read to you. Your chances of success are greater if your parents read you bedtime stories than if they sent you to elite private schooling. I mean, who would have thunk? I'm pleased that this is the case. I'm glad that there is an easy and accessible way for most parents to do that which is best for their child. Everyone, I hope, has a book at home that they can read to their child. That's not hard to come by in our Western world. This is not something that is difficult. This isn't too much. We all have a goddamn. There's a library nearby. You can get a library card. You can check shit out. This is easily accessible, and the evidence shows that if you do this, it's more impressive upon the chances of your child being successful than sending them to elite private schools. Bitchin'. This devilish twist, oh yes, it's devilish, it's evil. Reading to your child is evil because it bestows a better advantage than sending your child to elite private school, and we feel bad about telling you not to do it, so we're just kind of gonna be bad communists and tell you that it's okay. We're gonna give you a pass. You can read to your kid. This devilish twist of evidence surely leads to a further conclusion that, perhaps in the interest of leveling the playing field, bedtime stories should also be restricted. In Swift's mind, this is where the evaluation of familial relationship goods goes up a notch. How fucking kind of you. How kind of you for letting us read to our kids, Swift. You're fucking Santa Claus now. You have to allow parents to engage in bedtime stories activities. In fact, we encourage them because those are the kinds of interactions between parents and children that do indeed foster and produce these desired familial relationship goods. Swift makes it clear that although both elite schooling and bedtime stories might both skew the family game, restricting the former would not interfere with the creation of the special loving bond that families give rise to. Taking the books away is another story. Aw, they got punny. They got punny on us. We could prevent elite private schooling without any real hit to healthy family relationships. Whereas if we say you can't read bedtime stories to your kids because it's not fair that some kids get them and others don't, that would be too big a hit to the core of family life. This is creepy as fuck. Reading that is just creepy as fuck. So should parents snuggling up for one last story before lights out be even a little concerned about the advantage they might be conferring? Yeah, they're actually asking us this. I don't think parents reading their children bedtime stories should constantly have in their minds the way that they are unfairly disadvantaging other people's children. But I think they should have that thought occasionally, quipped Swift. In the end, Swift agrees that all activities will cause some sort of imbalance. Again, pointing out the obvious. From joining faith communities to playing Saturday cricket, and it's for this reason that a theory of familial goods needs to be established if the family is to be defended against cries of unfairness. My God, the fact that this is even being discussed and thought out is depressing. We should accept that lots of stuff that goes in that goes on in healthy families and that our theory defends will confer unfair advantage, he says. It's the usual bind in ethics and moral philosophy. Very often values clash, and you will have to make a call. For Swift and Brighouse, the line sits shy of private schooling, inheritance, and other predominantly economic ways of conferring advantage. So basically, you're not allowed to use your wealth, your money, the thing that you earn to do with whatever the fuck you want. You can't use that to help your kid. You cannot use inheritance, private schooling, or predominantly economic ways of conferring advantage. What a crock of shit. Their conclusions remind one of a more idyllic or mythic age for families, reading together, attending religious services, playing board games, and kicking a ball in the local park, not to mention enjoying roast dinner on Sunday. It conjures a family setting worthy of a classic Norman Rockwell painting, but not so fast. When you ask Swift what sort of families he's talking about, the 50s revelry comes crashing down into the 21st century. When we talk about parents' rights, we're talking about the person who is parenting the child. How you got to be parenting the child is another issue. One implication of our theory is that it's not just one's biological relation that does much work in justifying your rights with respect to how the child is parented. Again, we're ignoring the common pattern of how parents become parents and going out into the weeds. We're going back into the weeds because my special interest groups, my exceptions to the rule. For Swift and Brighouse, our society is curiously stuck in a time warp of proprietorial rights. If you biologically produce a child, you own it. Well, yeah, you made the child. It is with your labor that you created the child. I hope that the parents would have a right to own the child. But we do digress. We think that although in practice it makes sense to parent your biological offspring, that is not the same as saying that in virtue of having produced the child, the biological parent has the right to parent. Ugh. Fucking communists. Then, does the child have a right to be parented by her biological parents? Swift has a ready answer. It's true that in societies in which we live, biological origins do tend to form an important part of people's identities, but that is largely a social and cultural construction, so you could imagine societies in which the parent-child relationship could go really well even without there being this biological link. I'm sorry, I have to take a pause here because I know parents who have adopted. And I know people who are in the adoption system. And it's a pain, it's a process, and there are painstaking measures taken that children who go into adoptive homes are well suited and adapted to the environment that the parents have set up, and that their temperaments and those of the children are complementary. I know families who have adopted children, And the process was so rigorous that the end result is a pairing of adoptive parents with children that you cannot tell are adopted. That is how vigorous this vetting process can be. And that does not reaffirm this conclusion. It goes against it. There most certainly is some biological factor in this process that we cannot quantify yet, that we are still eagerly trying to accommodate in the adoption process. Is it a just process? Most likely not. Because it's hard to quantify and codify something like this biological link that certain adoptive services try to replicate, because they are professionally bound to do that which is best for the child that is being adopted. But going on further into the article of nonsensical communist bullshit, from this realization arises another twist. 2 is not the only number. Oh yeah, we're going there. Nothing in our theory assumes 2 parents. There might be 2, there might be 3, and there might be 4, says Swift. It's here that the traditional notions of what constitutes a family come apart. A necessary product of the Swift and Brighouse analytical defense is the calling into question of some rigid definitions. Politicians love to talk about family values, but meanwhile, the family is in flux, and so we wanted to go back to philosophical basics to work out what are families for and what's so great about them, and then can we start to figure out whether it matters whether you have 2 parents or 3 or 1, or whether they're heterosexual, etc. For traditionalists, though, Swift provides a small concession. This small concession, that this is priceless. We do want to defend the family against complete fragmentation and dissolution, he says. If you start to think about a child having 10 parents, then that's looking like a committee rearing a child. There aren't any parents there at all. Again, no shit. Although it's controversial, it seems that Swift and Brighouse are philosophically inching their way to a novel accommodation for a weathered institution ever more in need of rationale for existing. Swift and Brighouse are philosophically inching their way to a novel accommodation for a weathered institution ever more in need of a rationale for existing? Holy bitches, you started this article conceding the fact that family units are inherently superior to non-family units. The bathwater might be going out, but they're keen to hold on to the baby. On the question of the number of parents, let me simply give my 2 cents on the number of parents. A child needs 2 parents. And they need 2 parents, not just because of what a child needs. A child deserves 2 parents because it took 2 people to make the child. That's a foundational reality that we just have to stick with. The pattern is it takes 2 to make. It should require at least 2 to maintain and rear and make a successful story. them's the rules. That is the pattern of human behavior, of human nature and human society. I'll even go this far. Even in polygamous cultures and relationships, the child has two parents. He has the father and he has his mother who gave birth to him. The child is raised by two parents. The other sister wives might help with chores, but the actual raising is done with the father and the mother, who were crucial in their creation. Even in most polygamous relationships, that never changes. But another reason why you need two parents, and I would even argue a heterosexual pair, is because you need a dynamic in which for the child to acknowledge their dual nature. Every child needs to see the duality of mankind reflected in their parents. They need to see light and dark. They need to see man and woman. They need to see justice and mercy. They need to see the duality of their existence represented in the unit that nurtures and raises them. This is completely beyond. It's two things. It's the first thing that we discussed at the first. You've gone beyond the pattern and you've gone retarded. That's first of all. But secondly, there's another thing at play here. This is a manifestation of what can be called the bigotry of lowered expectations. This is something that I hate about primarily socialists, leftists, social justice warriors, and those trying to fix all of society's ills. We have this bigotry of lowered expectations. Certain people can't measure up, therefore something's wrong with the standard. No, nothing is wrong with the standard. The standard is what it is because that is what is best and healthy. The fact that some people can't live up to it is irrelevant. The fact, if people are going to be having children and starting families, it is imperative and it behooves society to hold those families to the highest standard possible to hopefully create the highest standard of individual possible. We should be encouraging families to read to their children because it's basically good for the child. The fact that someone else might not read to their kid and it might disadvantage them should result in us shaming the parents, not telling the good parents, "Oh, you're disadvantaging others." Stop letting these fuckers be lazy and dragging us down with them. That is the completely wrong take if we wanted to actually give a damn about society and the end result and the production of children being raised in our societies. We should be promoting them to have the best that they can possibly get, not sinking down to the lowest common denominator. Those are my thoughts on this. This was an absolute shit show. I am sorry I exposed you to it, but I saw the title. I'm just like, this is absolutely fucking ridiculous, and it's gonna be a hoot. Anyways, guys, thank you. Have a great day.